During her 3 years at the Antarctic Research Base, Dr. Rachel Bennett saw a lot of strange things. Meteorite strikes, strange ice formations, and broken equipment that didn't follow the rules of physics. But she was not ready for what she found half a mile from the main compound on that cold Tuesday morning. There was black snow around the crater that was burned in a perfect circle about 60 feet wide. The impact site released steam, which melted the permafrost and made a strange fog that swirled in the wind at -40 degrees. Rachel's radio was full of excited voices from other researchers who had seen the flash in the sky last night, but she could barely hear them. She was focused on the thing in the middle of the crater. It looked like a dragon. Not like the ones from old movies that are set in the Middle Ages, but something much bigger and scarier. The body was almost 40 feet long and had scales that shone between copper and bronze, even though they were cracked and broken. There were wings that could have been made of metal or flesh lying crumpled under its huge body. Blood, thick and glowing with a faint blue light, pooled in the snow around many wounds on its body. The creature's chest rose and fell with shallow, hard breaths. When she breathed out, a small cloud of vapor formed that sparkled with tiny lights, as if diamonds had been mixed with mist. Rachel's training kicked in before she could fully understand what she was seeing. Being alive. Taking a breath. Bleeding. In bad shape. Nothing else was important. She slid down into the hole, and her boots made a crunching sound on the frost-covered rock and debris. Her emergency medical kit hit her hip, and all of a sudden it felt too small and not good enough for the job ahead. The research team yelled at her from behind, telling her to wait, be careful, and not get too close until they knew what they were dealing with. Rachel didn't pay attention to them. Before this job, she had been a wilderness medic for 8 years. She had treated people who had been attacked by bears and people who had been caught in avalanches in conditions that most doctors couldn't even think of. This was just another patient. A very, very strange patient, but still one who needed help. She thought the damage was bad, but it was even worse up close. 3 big cuts on the left side of the creature, each one at least 2 feet long. Burns that looked like gunfire burned the scales on its back. At least 2 places on one wing looked broken. There was glowing blood everywhere and it was still flowing, which meant time was running out. Rachel knelt down next to the biggest wound and opened her kit. First, put on the pressure bandages. Stop the blood flow. She moved quickly, wrapping the shiny medical tape around the creature's body. The scales were warm to the touch, even though it was cold outside. They felt like a mix of stone and living tissue. The dragon's eye, which was huge and golden and had a vertical pupil like a cat's, suddenly opened. It looked at Rachel with an intelligence that made her stop. This wasn't a creature. This was a person. A person. Someone who was aware, conscious, and in a lot of pain. "Please don't move," Rachel said softly as she kept working. "I'm trying to help you." The creature's chest made a noise that sounded like rocks grinding together, and then a voice came from a small device that might have been its collar. The words had a strong accent, but they made sense. "Why do you help me?" Rachel didn't look up from what she was doing. She was putting antiseptic on the wounds now to keep them from getting infected. "Because you're hurt. Because I'm a doctor. Because it's the right thing to do. Your kind doesn't know me. I could be a threat." "Maybe," Rachel said as she grabbed her portable oxygen tank. She moved the mask around to see how it would fit over the dragon's nose. "But right now you're about to die. We can work out the rest later." The dragon made a noise that could have been a laugh or a cough. It let out more of that sparkling mist through its nose. Useful. Brave. Or stupid. Rachel finally got the oxygen mask in the right place and said, "A little bit of all 3. Now take a deep breath. It's clear that your lungs are bigger than mine, but oxygen is oxygen. This should help." She worked for 20 minutes without stopping, even though helicopters were flying around above her and an emergency response team was surrounding the crater. Her world had shrunk to taking care of wounds, checking vital signs, and keeping this amazing person alive. When she finally sat back on her heels, her hands were covered in that glowing blood, and every muscle in her body hurt from the cold and stress. The dragon's breathing had become steady. The blood flow had slowed to a trickle. It looked like it was amazed as it watched her with its golden eyes. The voice from the translator got stronger and said, "I am Thornax, last of the Archon flight leaders. And you, little healer, have done what the best hospitals in 1,000 systems could not. You saved my life with things a kid might have." Rachel looked at her basic field kit and then back at Thornax. "Sometimes all you need is simple. Simple is sometimes better." "Yes." Thornax's eyes moved to the soldiers who were setting up a perimeter. "They will want to learn more about me. Ask you a question. Lock us both up so we can figure out what happened here." Rachel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind from Antarctica. She had been so focused on the medical emergency that she hadn't thought about what would happen next. The first contact. Life from another planet. The effects were huge. Thornax's voice broke into her thoughts. Rachel Bennett, come with me. People like you need to heal the galaxy. Needs people like you. And I owe you a debt that can only be paid back with knowledge and chances that are beyond your world. Rachel looked at her hands, which were still glowing with alien blood. She looked at Thornax, this impossible person she had saved with just basic medical supplies and her willpower. She looked up at the sky and thought about the whole universe that was up there that she had never thought could be real. Are we leaving now? She asked. Rachel's stomach dropped when she first saw Station Crimson. The station looked like someone had taken 100 different ships and welded them together without making sure they all matched through the viewport of Thornax's repaired ship. Rusty metal panels didn't go well with smooth alien alloys. The huge building was covered in flickering lights that looked like dying fireflies. This wasn't the bright picture of the future she had in mind. This was a place that was held together by need and duct tape. Not what you thought? Thornax rumbled next to her and his huge body barely fit in the cockpit. I thought space stations would be cleaner, I guess? Rachel said yes. This is a place for refugees. The unwanted, the forgotten, and the running. They come here because they can't go anywhere else. Thornax steered the ship toward a docking port that didn't look as bad as the others. Welcome to the real world of galactic society. The air in the station didn't smell right. Rachel couldn't quite put her finger on it. It was a mix of too many living things breathing recycled oxygen that had been used too many times. There were beings of all shapes and sizes in the hallways. Some walked on legs, some floated, and some slithered. A lot of kids with too many eyes stared at her as she walked by. Old creatures leaned against walls, their bodies bent with tiredness. Thornax took her to the medical area, and Rachel's heart sank even more. There was only one big room in the hospital, and it was full of beds, pods, and platforms that were made for different types of aliens. There were hundreds of patients in different states of distress, and a machine was in the middle of it all. It was 12 feet tall, made of chrome, and had dozens of mechanical arms that moved between patients. A voice that sounded like it was made up of machines echoed through the room, announcing diagnoses and treatment plans in a cold, emotionless way. Is that it? Rachel wanted to know. Is that everyone on the medical staff? A little alien with purple skin and 4 arms came up to them. She was wearing something that looked like a nurse's uniform, but it was dirty and ripped. The AI runs everything, she said in English with a strong accent. Rachel's translator tried hard to make sense of what she said. We just do what it tells us to do. Take care of patients. Give what it tells us to give. Rachel walked between the beds, and her medical training screamed at what she saw. A patient who clearly has trouble breathing is being given medicine for a stomach problem. Another person who looked dehydrated was hooked up to machines that were clearly not helping. The AI was treating symptoms it could see, but it missed the obvious problems that a first-year medical student would have seen. How long has that person been waiting? Rachel pointed to a young alien child, maybe 6 or 7 in human years, who was lying still on a bed in the corner. The nurse in purple looked at a data pad. 16 hours. The AI says that her condition is stable but can't be treated. She's only in line for comfort care. Rachel felt anger building up in her chest. Ignoring what the nurse said, she walked over to the child. She knew right away what was wrong when she saw the pale skin, shallow breathing, and cracked lips. Very bad dehydration. Not enough electrolytes. Fever caused by an infection that could have been treated if the right steps had been taken. Rachel said, "She's dying from something I can fix with fluids and basic care." She was already taking things out of the emergency kit she had packed before leaving Earth. Bring me clean water. Salt. Sweet. And something to start and 4-line. But the AI said, "The AI is wrong," Rachel cut in. "Please just believe me." People at the station quickly heard about it. Rachel turned an empty storage bay into a field hospital in just 3 days. She couldn't go to the main medical center because the AI kept changing her mind, so she went off on her own. Thornax stood watch at the door, and his huge size was enough to keep the station's security from getting involved. Rachel's right-hand woman was the purple nurse, whose name was Kellex. They had worked together to treat 40 patients that the AI had said were terminal or couldn't be treated. 40 people who were now awake, talking, eating, and getting better. Rachel worked shifts of 18 hours, teaching Kellex and other volunteers the basics as she went. How to feel a pulse. How to tell if you're dehydrated. How to keep an eye on breathing. Things that any human doctor would know, but that had been forgotten in a galaxy where machines did everything. On the 4th day things went wrong. The alarms went off all over the station. The AI's voice said that there was a code red situation in the lower sectors. A disease had broken out and was quickly spreading through the small living spaces where most of the refugees lived. Rachel borrowed a datapad and pulled up the reports. They made her blood run cold. Fever, throwing up, diarrhea that is very bad, and weakness. The symptoms were deadly within 48 hours of starting. The AI had already closed off 3 whole areas, forcing everyone inside to stay there until they died. 3,000 beings are thought to have died. Rachel said, "That's murder." "That's the way it is," Kellick said sadly. "The AI has decided that the disease can't be treated with the resources we have. It has chosen to contain instead of cure." Rachel got up, her mind racing. She had seen these signs before during her training. Not this exact disease, but the pattern was familiar. Cholera, dysentery, and other waterborne diseases that have killed millions of people throughout history until doctors learned how to treat them. "Get me into those sealed areas," Rachel told Thornax. "Rachel, if you're wrong." "I'm not wrong," she said with confidence. "This isn't a super plague from another planet. This is dirty. Food or water that isn't good. And it's killing them because no one is doing the basic things to keep them hydrated and stable." Thornax and Kellick looked at each other. Then Thornax nodded and tore open the sealed door with his huge claws, ignoring the AI's warnings and protests. Inside it was a nightmare. There were bodies in the hallways. The sick people were too weak to move, so they huddled in corners. The air was stale and smelled like death. Rachel didn't think twice. She walked right into the middle of it all and began to put things in order. Kellick set up places for people to rehydrate. "The same mix I taught you: clean water, salt, and sugar. Anyone who can walk helps spread it." Rachel pointed to a group of refugees who looked healthier. "I need you 3 to help me find places where I can get water. If we don't stop this at the source, it will keep spreading." "But the AI said we can't fix this," someone weakly protested. Rachel knelt next to her dying mother and held her child. "The AI is not right. This can be fixed. Basic rehydration, replacing electrolytes, and keeping fluids in while the body fights the infection. It's old medicine, but it works." For the next 72 hours she hardly slept. Rachel went from patient to patient, showing volunteers how to mix oral rehydration solution, how to keep people's airways clear, and how to look for signs of shock or organ failure. She found the source of the outbreak to be a water recycler that was still technically working within acceptable limits, so the AI didn't flag it. The death rate had dropped by 60% by the end of the first week. New infections had stopped by the second week. The people who lived through it, who were weak but getting better, looked at Rachel as if she had done miracles. But she didn't use any high-tech tools. No miracle drugs. No science from aliens. Just clean water, basic electrolyte replacement, and constant care at the bedside. The same treatments that had saved lives on Earth for more than 100 years. The refugees began to call her something in their own languages. Thornax translated it one night when Rachel finally fell asleep from being so tired. He said softly, "The Holy Healer. They say you don't need machines. That the old magic is in your hands. That you can see what their technology can't." Rachel looked at her hands, which were cracked and dry from washing and cleaning them all the time. "It's not magic. It's only medicine. Medicine that works. The kind that remembers that patients are people, not just numbers for a computer to work with." There would never be another Station Crimson. Rachel wouldn't either. She had shown something important, something that would have effects all over the galaxy. The most advanced solution wasn't always the best one. Sometimes the universe just needed simple human knowledge. And there were millions more who needed to know that. This was only the start. For the 3rd time, Commander Vexen watched the surveillance video. His scaled fingers drummed on the armrest of his command chair. The person moved through the crowd of sick refugees like water flowing around rocks. They were quick and unstoppable. She didn't use any advanced tools or medical technology, but her patients lived at rates that shouldn't be possible. "Again, show me her success numbers," he said. His tactical officer got the information. 8% of the people she's treated have died. The death rate for AI-controlled sectors with the same disease is 62%. "Commander, she's doing better than our best medical systems with things that a sanitation worker would throw away." Vexen felt something cold settle in his chest. For 300 years, the Velarix Compact had built a medical monopoly in 40 systems. They had control over the technology, the treatments, and the rules. Civilizations paid tribute to get to their automated medical systems. And now this simple person was making them look old-fashioned with a bag of basic supplies. Vexen said quietly, "I want her brought in. Alive. We need to know how she's getting these results." And we need to make sure that her methods don't spread any further. Rachel was teaching 20 refugees how to do basic triage when Thornax came into the storage bay and blocked the door with his huge body. She had learned that his scales had turned a deep bronze color, which meant he was upset or worried. He said, "We have a problem. Several ships just docked. Military setup. Velarix compact logo." Rachel's stomach started to hurt. Other refugees had told her about the Velarix, a strong group that ran most of the medical infrastructure in the area. They didn't like competition, and they really didn't like it when someone questioned their authority. "How long do we have?" she asked, already mentally going through the list of patients who were stable enough to move. "Minutes. Maybe not as much." Kellex held Rachel's arm and her 4 hands shook. "They'll take you. Study you. You'll go away like everyone else who has stood up to them." Rachel looked at the people who were watching her. The young mother whose daughter she had saved. The old merchant who was only a few hours away from death when she found him. The kids who had begun to follow her around and call her Dr. Rachel, in a dozen different languages. She couldn't leave them behind. She wouldn't. "Okay, everyone listen up," Rachel said, making sure her voice stayed calm. "We're going to have guests who weren't invited. I need the most important patients to be moved to the second place we set up. Do you all remember what I taught you about taking care of wounds and dealing with fevers?" People in the room nodded their heads. "Good. You're all doctors now. Keep helping each other no matter what happens to me." When the storage bay door blew open, everyone dove for cover. As armored people came through the opening, smoke filled the room. With weapons raised, they moved with military precision, yelling orders in a language that Rachel's translator had a hard time translating. One of them, who was bigger than the others and had fancy markings on his armor, pointed right at Rachel. "The human. Keep her safe. Only non-lethal force." Thornax roared and lunged forward, making deep marks in the metal floor with his huge claws. 2 soldiers flew through the air, their armor crumpling like paper. But there were too many of them and they were ready. Energy nets wrapped around Thornax, shocking him and bringing him down. Rachel didn't run away from the soldiers, she ran toward them. She took her first aid kit and crawled under a table. When she came out, she was next to a young refugee who had been hit by debris from the explosion. There was a lot of blood coming from a cut on his head. "Someone put pressure on me here." Rachel yelled and started taking bandages out of her kit. Her hands moved on their own, putting pressure on the wound and checking his pupils for signs of a concussion. A soldier grabbed her by the shoulder and tried to pull her away. Rachel pushed him away. "Not yet. Give me 30 seconds or he'll bleed to death. We have orders." "I don't care about what you say." Rachel got mad. "This kid is going to die." 30 seconds. The soldier must have heard something in her voice because he hesitated. Rachel moved quickly, packing the wound, securing the bandage and positioning the boy's head so that his airway would stay clear. She stood up with her hands raised 28 seconds later. "Okay. I'm ready. Just don't hurt anyone else." But the refugees thought differently. The people Rachel had trained surrounded her, making a human shield of people of all kinds and sizes. Kellex stood at the front with all 4 arms outstretched. She said firmly, "If you want the healer, you have to go through all of us." More refugees came in through the hallways. The news spread through the station like wildfire. Within minutes, hundreds of people filled the area around the storage bay. Many of them were patients Rachel had saved. They didn't have any weapons. They weren't in the army. But they stood together, refusing to let their healer go. The standoff lasted for almost an hour. Rachel used the time to help people who were hurt on both sides. She moved easily between the refugees and the soldiers who were hurt. She cleaned wounds, put a Velarix soldier's broken arm back together, and showed a young refugee how to properly splint a broken leg. Finally, Commander Vexen himself showed up, pushing through the crowd with a group of elite guards. He looked at the scene in front of him. His soldiers getting medical help from the very refugees they had been sent to disperse. The human moved between them without fear, teaching as she worked. He said, "This has never happened before." Rachel stopped wrapping a soldier's burned hand in a bandage. "What's never happened before is that your medical systems fail 60% of the time for a disease I can treat with salt and sugar water. That's not advanced. That's careless. You don't get how complicated things are." "I know that people are dying because your machines can't change," Rachel said. "I get that you've made medicine so hard that you've lost sight of the basics. I get that you're more worried about keeping your monopoly than really helping anyone." Vexen's eyes got smaller. "Be careful, human. You're talking about things you don't understand." "Am I?" Rachel stood up and faced him directly, even though she was only half his height. Then tell me why I have 7 times as many successes as you do. Tell me why refugees who haven't had any training can keep people alive using the methods I taught them in 3 days. Tell us why your billion-dollar AI couldn't figure out that dirty water was killing people. People around them had stopped talking. Refugees recording on their own devices sent every word Rachel said echoing through the storage bay and the hallways beyond. Vexen figured out too late that this was more than just a capture operation. He was on trial and people from 100 worlds were watching him lose. Stand down, he finally told his men. But this isn't over yet, human. The Compact will keep an eye on you. And if your methods hurt people and they don't work out like we think they will, you'll be responsible for every death. Rachel said, I'll take that deal. As long as you take responsibility for all the deaths your systems are causing right now because they are inflexible and incompetent. Vexen left without saying anything else, and his soldiers followed him in a line. Rachel, on the other hand, knew this was just the start. She had made the Velarix Compact look bad in front of a lot of people. She had shown that their systems didn't work right. And big companies didn't forget that kind of shame. Thornax, finally free from the energy nets, limped over to her. Today you've made some dangerous enemies. Rachel looked around at the refugees who had put their lives on the line to save her. At Kelix, who had stood up to armed soldiers with nothing but bravery. At the young boy she'd saved, who was now sitting up and smiling even though his head was bandaged. Maybe, she said. But I've also made some good friends. And someone needs to teach this galaxy that medicine isn't about making money or using technology. It's about being smart enough to change when things go wrong, caring enough to help, and being brave enough to speak up when things go wrong. She picked up her medical kit and went to see the next patient. There was always a new patient. Commander Vexen was making plans somewhere in the cold, empty space. Plans that would put Rachel's skills, bravery, and willpower to the test in ways she couldn't even begin to think of. Now, the whole galaxy was watching. And the Holy Healer had just declared war on the most powerful medical authority in known space, armed with nothing but a field kit and an unshakable belief in doing what was right. From space the planet Kethra looked great. Purple clouds swirled around a world with deep oceans and islands that were spread out. Rachel put her face against the transport ship's window and watched the planet get bigger as they went down. It looked calm. Nothing like the nightmare that was waiting below. 3 million people are sick, Thornax said softly next to her. Another 2 million people are expected to get the disease this week. The Galactic Health Authority has said that it is a lost cause. They're getting important people out and leaving the rest to die. Rachel's hands turned into fists. How can they leave a whole planet behind? Because the AI systems have done the math. They say that treatment would need resources that aren't available. The pathogen is made to be resistant to normal galactic medical procedures. Their computers say they can't stop it. Thornax stopped for a moment. But you've already done things that seem impossible. That's why they got in touch with us. At the landing pad, the governor of Kethra met them. He was a tall being named Drexic, and his silver skin had turned pale gray from stress. He looked like he hadn't slept in a long time. The city behind him was eerily quiet. There is no traffic on the streets. There are no crowds. There were only empty buildings and the sound of medical transports rushing by with sirens blaring. Drexic's voice was hoarse when he said, "Thank you for coming. I know the Galactic Health Authority says we can't be saved, but I saw the reports from Station Crimson. There's a chance. Show me the patients," Rachel said softly, cutting in. "And tell me everything about how this all began." There was a lot of chaos at the hospital. There were beds in the hallways, patients lying on the floors, and medical staff moving like zombies through their shifts with dead eyes and tired bodies. Rachel first noticed the smell, which was the unmistakable smell of death and disease that no ventilation system could completely hide. Rachel walked through the wards, watching and taking notes on a datapad that Kelix had shown her how to use. The symptoms were terrible. A high fever that got worse within hours of getting sick. Patients were dangerously dehydrated because they were throwing up and having diarrhea a lot. Respiratory distress because the disease was attacking the lungs. Most patients died within 3 days of having symptoms. But Rachel could see patterns. Patterns she had learned about in medical school on Earth and in history books about epidemics that had killed many people before modern medicine. She muttered to herself as she looked over patient charts, "This isn't as strange as they think. Yes, it's aggressive, but the basic progression is something I'm used to." A Kethran doctor came up to her. His medical coat was dirty and wrinkled. "Hello, I'm Dr. VYN. I am in charge of this ward. Oversee might be too nice of a word though. I mostly just watch them die. What kinds of treatments have you tried?" Rachel asked. VYNN pulled up holographic screens that showed how to treat people. All of the AI suggestions. Antiviral drugs, drugs that boost the immune system, and therapy that helps cells grow back. Nothing works. The pathogen changes more quickly than our treatments. Rachel nodded slowly and an idea came to her. You're going straight at the disease. Trying to kill it? Of course. That's how medicine works. Rachel said, not always. Sometimes you don't fight the disease. You help the patient. Let them live long enough for their immune system to figure it out. Basic care that helps. Vionin looked like he didn't know what to do. Care that helps. We're beyond that. This is a bioweapon that was made on purpose. Rachel cut in and said, that still has to follow biology. Check out the signs. Dehydration is killing them faster than the disease itself. Their bodies are trying to fight, but they don't have enough resources. What if we just keep them stable instead of trying to cure them? For the next hour she talked about her plan. Aggressive therapy for rehydration. Replacing electrolytes. Oxygen support for trouble breathing. Managing a fever. Easy treatments that any hospital on Earth would use for serious infections. Vionin said, this is too simple. How could this work when our advanced treatments don't? Because your advanced treatments are trying to do too much, Rachel said. They're sick bodies that need help, not more stress. My way, we let the patient's own immune system do the heavy lifting. We just keep them alive while they fight. Drexic, who had been listening quietly, stood up. How many people do you need? Rachel did some quick math in her head. To take care of 3 million patients? I'd have to train a lot of people. At least 10,000 people who want to help. People who are willing to learn quickly and work hard. Can you get me that many? For hope? For a chance to save our planet? Drexic's eyes brightened for the first time since Rachel had met him. I can get you 50,000. That same night the training started. Rachel stood in a huge auditorium and looked out at thousands of people from many different Kethran ethnic groups. Volunteers from all over the world had come to learn from the alien healer who had worked miracles on Station Crimson. Rachel's voice echoed across the room as she said, I'm going to be honest with you. What I'm going to teach you isn't fancy. It's not very high-tech. It's the basics of patient care that my people developed over centuries of fighting diseases. Some of you might think that it's too easy to work. I promise you that simple is what we need right now. She began with the basics. How to tell if you're dehydrated. How to mix oral rehydration solution using just water, salt, and sugar. How to check your vital signs with your own hands and eyes instead of machines. How to put patients in the right position to help them breathe. How to stop the disease from spreading by practicing good hygiene. The Kethrans picked things up quickly. Desperation was a strong reason to act. Rachel's army of trained volunteers was all over the world within 3 days, setting up field hospitals and schools, warehouses, and community centers. Speed and coverage were the most important things. Rachel split the world into treatment areas, each with a team leader that she had trained herself. They used simple triage systems she had made, with color-coded cards to keep track of how each patient was doing. Green means stable, yellow means concerning, and red means critical. No complex computer systems, just visual markers anyone could understand at a glance. Kellex became her logistics coordinator, in charge of getting the simple supplies they needed. Salt, sugar, clean water, oxygen tanks, and basic medical supplies. Nothing strange or that needed advanced technology. Thornax flew between treatment centers in his huge ship, which had been turned into a mobile command post and supply depot. He'd taken to the work with surprising enthusiasm, using his ancient Archon knowledge to help Rachel understand the alien biology they were treating. The first week was awful. Rachel hardly slept as she moved between treatment centers, fixed problems, taught new volunteers, and changed protocols based on what she saw. The death rate remained high, hovering around 40%. But it wasn't 60% anymore. It wasn't the 80% the AI had predicted. By the second week, something amazing started to happen. Patients who had been treated early with Rachel's methods began to get better. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Enough to make you feel hopeful. The survivors now had antibodies, which meant their bodies had built up natural immunity while Rachel's teams kept them alive long enough to fight. On the third week, Dr. Vionin found Rachel in a field hospital. She was tired but had a look of wonder in her eyes. The death rate in your treatment areas is now only 22%. 22%, Rachel. Do you understand what that means? Rachel looked around at the volunteers who were working hard in the ward, checking on patients, mixing rehydration solution, and comforting the sick and scared. It means that the basics work. It means paying attention to what the patient wants instead of what the computer says. It means having faith in people to look out for one another. By the 5th week, the number of new infections had started to go down. The combination of better hygiene practices that Rachel had taught and the growing number of survivors with natural immunity was putting an end to the epidemic. The AI model said that the whole population would fall apart in 6 weeks. Kethra, on the other hand, was getting more stable. Governor Drexick and Rachel stood on a hill that looked down on the capital city. Lights were coming back on below them. People were going back out into the streets. Life was going on even though it was hurt. "They want to make a statue of you," Drexick said in a low voice. "In the main square. People are calling you Kethra's savior." Rachel shook her head. "I didn't save Kethra. Your people did. I just showed them that they always had the power. Having the best technology isn't what medicine is all about. It's about knowing what living things need and having the guts to give it to them, even when computers say it's not possible." She looked at her hands, which were still dirty from another long shift of taking care of patients. The real question is how many other worlds are dying because they don't remember these basics? How many planets has the galaxy given up on because their AI said it was useless? Thornax parked his ship nearby, and his huge body stood out against the setting sun. "The Velarix Compact is keeping an eye on you. They don't like that you've saved another world that their system said was doomed. Commander Vexen has been asking where you are." Even though it was a warm evening, Rachel felt cold. She had embarrassed the Velarix twice already. First on Station Crimson and now on Kethra. Powerful groups didn't let that kind of shame go. "Let them watch," she finally said. "Show them what happens when you put patients before money, and remember that medicine is about taking care of living things, not just following rules and running programs." Rachel knew the real fight was just beginning even as she talked. She had shown that her methods worked. Now she had to live long enough to teach them to a galaxy that really needed to remember what healing meant. 3 weeks after Rachel left Kethra, she got the invitation. It came as a formal holographic message that appeared in the main cabin of Thornax's ship. It had official seals and authoritative text on it. The Grand Medical Conclave on Ethon Prime asked her to come and talk about her methods and what they mean for medical practice in the galaxy. "It's a trap," Kellic said right away, crossing her forearms in a way that Rachel had learned meant she was being stubborn. "They're going to make you look bad in front of everyone in the medical field." Rachel read the invitation and thought about it. "Maybe. But it's also a chance. We could change medicine across hundreds of worlds if I can convince even a few of them and show them what they've forgotten." Thornax made a noise from where he was resting near the cargo bay. "The Velarix Compact's friends are in charge of the conclave. You will be walking into a room full of people who are making money off of the current system. People who think you are a danger." Rachel said, "Then I should get ready." Rachel couldn't believe how beautiful Ethon Prime was. There were huge towers that reached up to the sky and connected the whole planet. There were also bridges of light and floating transport platforms. Everything was neat, worked well, and was completely fake. Rachel thought of pictures she'd seen of futuristic cities in old sci-fi movies, but this was real. The conclave hall was a huge amphitheater in the middle of the planet that could hold 50,000 people. Rachel felt the weight of thousands of eyes on her as she walked down the middle aisle. Doctors, researchers, and other medical professionals from all over the galaxy filled the stadium seats. In the middle was a simple platform where she was supposed to stand. She was wearing her usual work clothes and carrying her medical kit over her shoulder. Some of the people in the conclave wore fancy robes with symbols of their accomplishments on them. Others were made of pure energy and lived in crystal containers. Rachel felt like a country doctor who had accidentally walked into a meeting of the best surgeons in the world. Elder physician Tremac, the head of the conclave, was the first to speak. It was hard to describe his shape because it changed from solid to gas. His voice echoed from all directions when he spoke. "Dr. Rachel Bennett is from Earth. You are in front of the smartest doctors in the whole galaxy. Your recent actions have caused a lot of problems with established medical procedures. You say that you get better results with what you call basic, or fundamental techniques. The conclave wants to know more about these claims and see if they are true." Rachel stepped onto the stage, her heart racing but her voice steady. "Thanks for the invite. I'm happy to show you how I do things and explain them." "Show me?" A loud voice broke through the noise of the crowd. Dr. Elixon, a crystalline being whose body glowed from within, floated down to where he could talk. "We've looked over your reports from Station Crimson and Kethra. You used old-fashioned ways to help people. Basic rehydration. Watching vital signs by hand. These are things that civilizations stop doing as they get better at using medical technology." "Give up," Rachel said it again. "That's an interesting choice of words. I'd say they don't remember. They forget why those basic things work. They forget that medicine is more than just running programs, it's also about understanding living systems. She took out her data pad and showed holographic pictures of her work. Patients on Station Crimson, both before and after treatment. Statistical comparisons that show how well she did compared to the AI systems. Kethra's recovery data. Your AI systems on Station Crimson had a 62% death rate from a disease that spreads through water. The percentage went down to 8% thanks to my methods. Not with high-tech tools. With oral rehydration solution, basic hygiene rules, and close watching. Your computers on Kethra said that the whole population would die. Instead, the planet is getting better because we focused on keeping patients alive while their immune systems fought back. Cherry-picked data, another member of the conclave said. Evidence from stories. You're putting apples next to starships. Rachel smiled a little. Okay. So, let me ask you all a question. When was the last time you all actually looked at a patient with your own hands? When was the last time you listened to breathing without a scanner? When was the last time you made a treatment choice based on what you saw instead of what a computer told you? The amphitheater went quiet. Rachel took advantage of the situation. I'm not saying that technology is bad. What I'm saying is that you've become so reliant on it that you can't change when it breaks. Your systems are too strict. They do exactly what they're told, but they can't come up with new ideas. They can't tell what's really wrong with a patient and what's wrong according to the scanners. She walked to the edge of the platform and looked up at the thousands of people who were watching her. Medicine on Earth went through something like this once. Doctors forgot how to really look at patients because we were so focused on tests and scans. We had to relearn how important it is to take a full history, do a physical exam, and use our brains instead of just ordering every test that was available. Primitive medicine for primitive species, Dr. Elixon said in a cold voice. Your Earth spent thousands of years dying from diseases that we got rid of in a few decades. You have the nerve to lecture us? I dare because your advanced medicine isn't working, Rachel shot back. You've gotten rid of the simple diseases. But when something new comes along that your systems weren't made to handle, you're out of luck. You put people in quarantine and let them die instead of changing and trying something new. The fight went on for hours. Rachel showed volunteer patients how to use techniques that showed how simple observation could find problems that more advanced scanners missed. She taught basic examination skills to conclave members who hadn't touched a patient in years. Some were fascinated. Others were hostile, seeing her as a threat to their entire worldview. Then everything changed. Elder physician Tremack suddenly flickered, his gaseous form destabilizing. He collapsed from his floating position, his crystalline containment vessel cracking as he hit the floor of the conclave chamber. Alarms blared immediately. Medical drones swarmed from hidden panels in the walls, scanning the fallen elder. Rachel watched as the drones ran their diagnostic sequences. Sophisticated machines scanning every possible parameter, running through treatment trees programmed for thousands of medical emergencies. But they were frozen, caught in analysis loops, unable to decide on treatment. Cardiovascular collapse, one drone announced. Running diagnostic sequence Alpha 79. Respiratory function failing, another reported. Initiating life support protocols. They were doing everything by the book. Everything their programming told them to do. An elder physician Tremack was dying while they analyzed. Rachel didn't think. She just moved. She vaulted over the platform railing and ran to the fallen elder, pushing through the swarm of confused drones. Her hands went to his neck, feeling for a pulse in the one solid part of his anatomy. Nothing. His gaseous form was barely holding together inside the cracked vessel. He's in cardiac arrest, Rachel shouted. Someone tell me if his species responds to chest compressions. A younger physician stumbled forward, her face pale. Yes, but the compression point is different, it's... Show me. The young doctor pointed to a spot on Tremack's torso. Rachel positioned her hands and started compressions. 30 compressions, check for pulse, repeat. She'd done this hundreds of times in training in real emergencies, but never on an alien whose biology she barely understood. Come on, she muttered. Stay with me. The medical drones continued their diagnostic sequences, ignoring Rachel's intervention because it wasn't in their protocols. The crowd of conclave members watched in stunned silence as a human used ancient Earth techniques on one of the galaxy's most respected medical leaders. 2 minutes of CPR. 3 minutes. Rachel's arms burned with the effort, sweat dripping down her face. She adjusted her technique based on what she observed, the subtle responses of Tremack's body, the way his gaseous form pulsed weakly with each compression. Breathing, the young physician said suddenly. He's breathing on his own. Rachel checked for a pulse and found one, weak but steady. She sat back on her heels, gasping for air herself, while medical staff finally rushed in with proper equipment for Tremax species. The amphitheater erupted in chaos. Arguments broke out in a dozen languages. Some conclave members were shouting about the human who'd saved their leader. Others were demanding explanations for why the medical drones had failed. Rachel stood up slowly, looking at Dr. Elixon. Your drones ran every diagnostic protocol they had. They followed every program sequence perfectly. And they would have let him die while they analyzed. I used a technique that's been around on Earth for decades. Basic cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Not fancy. Not high-tech. Just fundamental understanding of what a failing cardiovascular system needs. Dr. Elixon's crystalline form dimmed. Something Rachel had learned indicated deep thought or distress. You saved his life with manual compressions? With a technique any first-year medical student on Earth would know. Yes, Rachel said simply. That's exactly my point. You've built incredible systems. Amazing technology. But you've forgotten that sometimes the simplest approach is the right one. Sometimes you need a thinking, adapting mind more than you need a perfect program. The debate that followed lasted 3 more days. But something fundamental had changed. Rachel had proven her point in the most dramatic way possible, in front of the galaxy's medical elite. The conclave split into factions. Some, led by Dr. Elixon, began advocating for integrating Rachel's fundamental principles into galactic medical education. Others remained hostile, seeing her success as a threat to established systems and power structures. But Rachel had achieved something important. She'd planted seeds of doubt about the galaxy's over-reliance on technology. She'd shown that human knowledge, simple and ancient as it was, had value even among the stars. As she left Ethon Prime, Thornax rumbled beside her. You've made both powerful allies and dangerous enemies today. Rachel looked back at the gleaming city planet. Good. That means things are going to change. The only question is whether the change happens peacefully or whether we have to fight for it. She didn't know it yet, but the fight was already on its way. And it would put everything she thought she knew about medicine, people, and what it meant to be a healer to the test. Kirax had killed people for money, for his beliefs, and sometimes just because he needed to kill someone. The assassin had never missed a job in 200 years of work in 40-star systems. Never thought twice. Never questioned an assignment after getting paid. This job should have been easy. One woman is on a medical frigate with very little security. The Velarix compact was paying 3 times the normal rate, which meant they wanted it done right and without any noise. Kirax's species, the Morpheans, could change their bodies to look like almost any other humanoid species. They were best at getting in. The killer had watched Rachel Bennett's daily life, how she acted and how she spoke for 3 days. Then, dressed as a young Kethran medical student named Kira, Kirax went up to Rachel in the mess hall of the frigate. Dr. Bennett? Kirax kept the voice shaky and unsure. I was on Kethra. You saved my sister. I want to learn from you. Will you please teach me? Rachel looked up from her food, her tired but kind human eyes. You don't have to ask to learn. Take a seat. What's your name? Kirax lied smoothly. Kira? Well, Kira, the first thing you should learn is to always eat when you can. Medical work doesn't wait for meal times that are good for you. Kirax was in just like that. The assassin followed Rachel around the frigate for days, learning how she worked and waiting for the right time. A hallway that is quiet. A problem with the airlock. A medical emergency that would keep Rachel alone. The contract said it had to look like an accident. The Velarix didn't want a hero. But something strange began to happen. Kirax started to notice what Rachel was really doing. The frigate acted as a mobile clinic, going to small, remote settlements that didn't have enough medical facilities. Rachel would work 16 hours a day, taking care of everything from broken bones to long-term illnesses to problems that came up during childbirth. She never stopped teaching, always explaining her choices to those who were watching. Why do you talk so much when you work? Kirax asked one day, still acting like an eager student. Rachel smiled as she looked at a patient's infected wound. Medicine isn't supposed to be secret knowledge. The more people who know the basics, the more lives are saved when I'm not there. Look at this infection. Do you see the red lines that go from the wound? That's what lymphangitis is. It means that the infection is moving through the lymphatic system. Now you'll know what it is and that it needs to be treated right away. Kirax put the information away not because the contract said to, but because it was really interesting. The assassin had never seen anything like Rachel's approach to medicine before. Not a mystery. Not knowing everything. Just useful information that anyone can share. The mining accident happened next. The call came in at 3 a.m. A tunnel on a mining station on a distant asteroid fell down. Many people were hurt. The frigate changed course right away, and Rachel was already up and moving before the ship even docked. They carried the hurt people in on stretchers. 12 miners, all different kinds and all in bad shape. The worst was a little Thalaxian girl, maybe 8 years old in human years. Her skin was pale blue and now it was covered in rock dust and blood. Her chest was crushed and she was breathing quickly and shallowly. The medical scanner said there was only a 3% chance that she would live. Get her to the main surgical bay, Rachel said as she started to move. Dr. Bennett, the scanner says. I don't care what the scanner says. Get out of the way. Kirax followed, still acting like a student but really interested this time. Rachel worked on the child for hours. The surgical bay had high-tech tools but Rachel hardly ever used them. She relied on her hands, eyes, and judgment. When machines suggested one way to do things, she often chose a simpler one instead. Why aren't you using the automated stitches? Kirax asked, keeping an eye on Rachel as she carefully stitched up damaged tissue by hand. Because I can feel the stress. I can tell how much stress the tissue can handle. The machine is programmed to do something. I listen to what the patient's body is telling me. Rachel worked for hours and hours. She cleaned the wounds by hand, looking for debris that the scanners might have missed. She changed the rates of the fluids based on small changes in the child's skin color that no machine could see. She talked to the unconscious patient all the time, giving them a steady stream of support and information. You're doing great, honey. I know it hurts. I understand that you're scared. But you are strong. Your body knows how to get better. I'm just giving it a hand. Kirax had never seen anything like it before. In the galaxy's modern hospitals, patients were just numbers. Things that need to be fixed. This person acted like the child was her own daughter. After 20 hours of surgery, Rachel's hands were shaking from being so tired. Kellex tried to get her to take a break and let another doctor take over. Rachel said no. She's fighting so hard, Rachel said in a soft voice. I can feel it. She wants to stay alive. I'm not going to give up while she's still fighting. The child's vital signs became stable at hour 36. She opened her eyes at 48 hours. At hour 72, she was sitting up and asking for her parents in a weak voice that still had life and awareness. Kirax stood in the recovery room doorway, watching Rachel finally fall asleep in a chair next to the child's bed. Even while sleeping, the human's hand still held the small Thalaxian hand. Rachel seemed to need to keep touching the patient to be sure they were safe. Kirax felt something strange for the first time in 200 years. Doubt. The killer had killed politicians, criminals, rival agents, and even a few people who probably didn't deserve it. But they had all been ideas. Names on a contract. Goals to get rid of. Kirax had never spent weeks watching someone to see what they did and why they were important. Rachel Bennett helped people live. Not just because it was her job or for money, but because she really couldn't stand the thought of people dying when she could have stopped it. She taught others how to heal without charge, making more healers wherever she went. She worked until she fell over, then got up and worked some more. People like this were needed in the galaxy. The universe was already cruel. It didn't need to lose someone who made it better. But the contract was clear. The payment has already been made. Morphean honor required that it be finished. If you broke a contract, you would be ashamed of yourself and your whole family. Kirax had never lost. Not once did I think about it. 3 days later, the perfect chance came up. Rachel was by herself in a storage bay, putting medical supplies in order. You could mess with the bay's life support to make it look like it was broken. Rachel would die of suffocation before anyone found her. Make it clean. Not able to be found. The Velorix got exactly what they wanted. Kirax came into the bay and changed back into its natural form. Skin that was pale gray, arms and legs that were long, and a face that was almost featureless except for big black eyes. The assassin had a small device in one hand that would take over the bay's atmospheric controls. Rachel turned around, saw Kirax's real form and wasn't even shocked. She just looked sad. So it was you, she said in a low voice. I was curious. Some of your questions were too tactical. Too focused on routines and weaknesses. I'm a doctor, not a security expert, but I've seen enough to know when someone is looking for a target. Why didn't you turn me in then? Kirax asked, really confused. Because I wanted to be wrong. And even if I was right, I thought you might change your mind. Rachel put down the container of supplies she had been holding. That kid. The one you saw me save. Was it important to you? Kirax didn't answer right away. The assassin thought the device was heavy. Kirax finally said, I watched you fight for 72 hours straight to save one life. One small, unimportant life that the computers said wasn't worth saving. You didn't quit. You didn't figure out the odds or how well it would work. You just wouldn't let her die. Rachel said, "That's what doctors do." Kirak said, "No. That's what you do. Most doctors in this galaxy see patients as problems to be solved. You treat them like they are important. Like every single life is worth fighting for." The killer looked at the device and then at Rachel. "The Velarix Compact paid me to kill you. They paid a lot. They're scared of you not because you're dangerous but because you're showing them that their whole medical system is wrong. You're proving to the galaxy that they don't need to pay a lot of money for their own treatments. That simple, free information can save more lives. And are you going to kill me?" Rachel wanted to know. Kirax could tell that her hands were shaking a little, even though her voice was steady. Kirax thought about the child, the thousands of lives Rachel had saved, and the students she had trained who would go on to save even more. The assassin thought about honor, contracts, and the burden of never failing for 200 years. Then Kirax crushed the device in one hand, and the pieces sparked and died. The killer said, "No. I'm going to tell you exactly what the Velarix are up to. Someone has to stop them and you are the only one who might be able to do it." Rachel sagged with relief and then stood up straight. "Tell me everything." Kirax said, "They're making a crisis. A synthetic pathogen that is made to be resistant to all normal galactic treatments. They will let it out on a lot of worlds at the same time. The Velarix will offer their own cure when people start to die, but only to governments that sign exclusive contracts for medical supplies. They'll use death and fear to keep their grip on galactic medicine for the next 100 years. Rachel's face turned white, and then it became hard with determination. "When?" "Soon. In a matter of weeks. They wanted you dead first because they know you could plan a response that doesn't rely on their technology. Can you get me the technical details? Is there anything about the pathogen that could help make countermeasures?" Kirax nodded. "I can do better than that. I can tell you where their research facilities are, when they will be finished and what worlds they want to study. Everything I learned while they thought I was their faithful contractor." "Why?" Rachel asked. "Why put everything on the line to help me?" Kirax thought about it for a while. "Because I've been killing people for 200 years. Maybe it's time for me to help save some instead. And because that child had a right to live. So do the billions who will die if the Velarix win." Rachel reached out her hand, a sign of trust and partnership. Kirax took it, and the assassin's gray fingers wrapped around Rachel's smaller hand. Rachel said, "Welcome to the team. Just so you know, we might die trying to stop a galactic conspiracy." "Good," Kirax said, and it looked like he smiled. "I was getting bored with contracts that were too easy. The information Kirax gave us made things look very bad." Rachel sat in the small conference room of the frigate, looking at holographic displays that showed the full plan for the Velarix Compact. 17 worlds to hit. Release of pathogens at the same time. If nothing were done, the number of deaths would be in the billions. "They're calling it Operation Necessary Correction," Kirax said, his gray face showing no emotion but his voice showing a hint of disgust. "Internal documents say it was meant to teach the galaxy a lesson about the risks of not following proper medical procedures. What they really mean is punishing anyone who dared to use your methods instead of paying for their own." Thornax growled from his spot near the door where his huge body barely fit. "This is medicine that is really genocide. How many people in the Velarix know about this?" "Only upper management. Perhaps 30 people work for them in total. Everyone else thinks they are making a cure for new diseases, not the disease itself." Kirax opened another file. "The pathogen is beautiful in a scary way. Very contagious, doesn't respond to any standard treatments, but has a genetic flaw that only the Velarix cure can take advantage of. It took them 5 years to build it." Rachel looked over the technical details, and her medical training helped her understand the complicated biological data. It attacks many systems at once. Respiratory, circulatory, and immune. It's already deeply embedded in the patient's cells by the time symptoms show up. She stopped, her finger hovering over one part. "But there is something here. Look at this. The pathogen needs certain conditions to reproduce quickly. Temperature range, pH levels, and some cellular environments." "What do you mean?" Kelix asked from the other side of the table, her 4 arms crossed in thought. "Which means that it might be possible to make things so that it doesn't spread as easily. We can't fix it without their special solution, but we might be able to slow it down. Make people live longer. Give us time to come up with our own ways to fight back." Rachel's mind was already racing through all the options. "We'd need to set up huge networks of supportive care. Use the same basic methods we used on Kethra to keep sick patients stable, but on a much larger scale. The floor creaked when Thornax moved his weight. 17 worlds, Rachel. You taught thousands of people on Kethra and it almost killed you. This is a lot bigger. Rachel said firmly, that's why I can't do it alone. She got up and started to walk around, which she did when she was trying to figure out hard problems. We need to get everyone I've trained to work. Every student at Station Crimson, every volunteer at Kethra, and every doctor who learned from the Conclave demonstration. We make a network of responses that are spread out. Kirax said, the Velorix will see that coming. They'll change their plans or go after your networks directly. Rachel stopped walking around and looked at the killer. Then we go first. We don't wait for them to let the pathogen out. We need to get ready now. Setting up response plans, training teams, and stockpiling supplies. We're ready when the outbreak happens. Kellic said, that's going to get attention. An enormous mobilization of medical volunteers across 17 worlds? The Velorix will know that something is wrong. Good, Rachel said with a small smile. Let them be worried. Let them think about whether their plan has been messed up. People who are worried make mistakes. She looked at Kirax. Can you give them false information? Make them believe that we're looking at the wrong worlds or the wrong timeline. Kirax's face changed a little, which is the Morphean way of showing that he was thinking. I'll give it a try. People I used to know in the Velorix still think I'm looking for you. I could send reports that make it look like you're looking into something else. Maybe buy us a few more weeks. Rachel said, do it. She opened a star chart that showed the 17 worlds she wanted to go to. Kellic, I need you to get in touch with our contacts on each of these planets. In a quiet way. We need local coordinators who can get volunteers and supplies together without causing any trouble with the authorities. What about the Galactic Health Authority? Thornax asked. Shouldn't they get a warning? Rachel shook her head. Velorix has an effect on the authority that makes it less effective. Half of their leaders have financial ties to the compact. If we go through official channels, the people we're trying to stop will find out what we're doing. No, this needs to start at the bottom. Face to face. Network to network. Rachel hardly slept for the next 2 weeks. She worked with people all over the galaxy, using encrypted channels that Kirax helped set up. There were too many responses. People she had trained were happy to help. People in worlds where her methods had worked were willing to get ready, even if they didn't fully understand the threat. Dr. VNN from Kethra was one of her main coordinators, putting together volunteers from 3 different systems. The young doctor from Ethon Prime who helped out during the Conclave incident hired medical students who were tired of rigid, technology-dependent schooling. Some Velorix employees who were sickened by what they learned, quietly shared information and resources. But Rachel was starting to show the strain. She had lost weight, dark circles had formed under her eyes, and her hands shook because she was tired and had too much caffeine. Kellic found her late one night in the medical bay, going over the supply manifest for the 1000th time. Kellic said softly, you need to rest, and led Rachel to a chair. You're working too hard. Rachel's voice was rough with tiredness when she said, people are going to die. Billions of people will die if we fail. I can't relax knowing that. Kellic replied, you can't help anyone if you fall apart. You've done something amazing, Rachel. You have made a network of healers on many worlds. But you still think you have to do everything on your own. You have to let other people help you with some of the work. Rachel looked at her friend's worried face and the 4 hands that were gently but firmly holding her shoulders. I'm scared, Kellic. What if I'm not right? What if my methods aren't enough to stop something this well-made and deadly? Then we change, Kellic said simply. Isn't that what you always tell people? Watch, change and care. We'll do the same thing we did on Kethra and Station Crimson. We'll keep people alive until we can find a way to fix things. But you have to be healthy and clear-headed to get us through it. Rachel finally agreed to go to sleep and nodded. But 3 hours later, urgent alarms woke her up. Thornax burst into her room, his scales dark with anger. We have a problem. A big one. Rachel got out of bed and put on clothes. What happened? A group within the Velorix that wants the operation to move faster caught one of Kirax's false reports. They say that waiting is too risky now that there is organized opposition. They want to move the release date up. How much time do we have? Rachel asked, forgetting how tired she was in a rush of adrenaline. Days. At most a week. Rachel's mind raced as she thought about what they needed to do. They had volunteers trained on most of the target worlds, but their supply chains weren't fully set up. They might have had 60% of the medical supplies they needed. They were still working on the rules for how to talk to each other. They weren't prepared. Not even close. Get everyone on a priority channel, Rachel said, her voice steady even though she was scared. Every coordinator, every team leader, and every volunteer who can get a message. We don't have time to get ready carefully. We use what we have. A network across the whole galaxy turned on within hours. Thousands of volunteers who had learned Rachel's methods took their places on the target worlds. They turned schools and warehouses into field hospitals. They gathered the basic supplies they would need, like clean water, electrolytes, oxygen, and basic medical equipment. They formed teams and each person knew what to do. Rachel sent a message to all of them, and her face showed up on screens in 17 different worlds. I'm not going to lie to you. Things are going to get worse. People who care more about making money than saving lives released a disease that kills. A lot of us won't make it through what's coming. But we're still going to fight. With the tools we have and the information we've shared, we're going to save as many lives as we can. We're going to show that medicine isn't just about expensive gadgets or secret cures. It's about people caring enough to help others, even when it seems like they can't. She stopped and looked straight into the camera. The Velarix Compact thinks they can control the galaxy's medical systems by using fear and death. They believe that people will give in instead of watching their loved ones die. They're wrong. We're going to show them that you can't beat healers who won't give up. That you can't stop knowledge once it's been shared. Be strong. Have faith in your training. And keep in mind that every life you save is a win against people who thought they could use medicine as a weapon. The message got out on both official and unofficial networks. Some governments tried to stop it. Some people talked about it openly. But the volunteers did hear it. Billions of regular people who learned they could make a difference without having to spend a lot of money on technology or get special training. After the broadcast, Kirax showed up next to Rachel, and the assassin's body was tense. The Velarix just turned on their release protocols. It's happening. All 17 worlds at the same time. Rachel took a deep breath and looked at Thornax, Kelix, and Kirax. Her strange group. A dragon from long ago, a refugee with 4 arms, and an assassin who has changed. Rachel said, then we are too. Let's show them what happens when you try to turn something that shouldn't be a weapon into a weapon. Let's show them what healers can do when they don't give up on the impossible. The galaxy was about to see the biggest test of what humans knew about medicine ever. Rachel Bennett, a wilderness medic from Earth, was in charge of the fight. She had only basic medical supplies, an army of volunteers who believed that caring was more important than making money, and a lot of determination. She had started by saving a dying dragon with a simple first aid kit. The battle for the heart of galactic medicine had begun. The pathogen hit all 17 worlds at the same time like a tidal wave. Emergency rooms were full within 6 hours of the release. Governments were declaring states of emergency within 12 hours. The number of deaths was rising into the hundreds of thousands within 24 hours. Rachel watched as reports poured in from her command center on board Thornax's ship, which was now circling the world that had been hit the hardest, Nexera. The numbers were so big that they were hard to understand. But she couldn't think about a lot of things. She had to pay attention to what she could change. Status reports from all 17 worlds, she said, her voice hoarse from hours of making calls to coordinate. Kelix brought up holographic displays that showed their networks of volunteers. We're active on all the planets we want to be. Field hospitals are open for business. Supply chains are barely holding up. But Rachel, the rate of infection is worse than we thought it would be. It's spreading faster than anything we've ever seen. Because it was meant to, Kirax said bitterly from the corner. The assassin had been watching Velarix's communications and keeping track of how they responded. They made it so that it would spread as much as possible. Every setting is set to the best possible level to spread before symptoms show up. A news broadcast on the main screen showed Commander Vexen making a speech to the public. His reptilian features were set up in a way that showed he was worried on purpose. The Velarix Compact is ready to help all the worlds that need it, Vexen said in a calm voice. We have found a way to stop this terrible pandemic. But distribution needs a lot of resources and infrastructure. We are ready to give this cure to any government that is willing to sign full medical supply agreements that make sure the protocols are followed. Ransom, Thornax growled. He's holding the cure hostage. Rachel's hands turned into fists. The deals that Vexen talked about weren't just contracts. They were surrender papers that would give the Velarix full control over the medical systems on each planet for the next 50 years. How many governments have signed? Accept our terms or watch your people die. Rachel asked in a quiet voice. Kirax said, 3 so far. 5 more are in talks. The others are trying to hold out, but the pressure is rising quickly. Every hour, thousands of people are dying. Rachel got Dr. Vyn's reports on Kethra. He had put together 600 volunteers into treatment teams in the world's biggest cities. The report was bad, but there was still hope. "We're keeping the death rate at about 40%, VNN had written. "Without treatment, the pathogen kills 95% of people who are infected within 3 days. Our methods of supportive care are giving the immune systems time to fight back. It's not enough, but it's a start. We need more supplies and more time." It was horrible that 40% of people died. But it was better than 95% of the time. It meant that 60% of patients lived long enough for their bodies to make antibodies. Every person who survived was a small victory and a possible source of information about treatment. "Send this to all the coordinators," Rachel said as she typed quickly. "We're seeing patterns of survival. Patients who get aggressive hydration therapy within the first 6 hours do a lot better. Put your attention on early intervention. Don't wait until all the symptoms are there. And I need samples from all of the survivors. We need to learn what their immune systems figured out." The next 72 hours were a blur of planning, dealing with problems, and making things up as they went along. Rachel worked on 17 different worlds at the same time, changing protocols based on what worked and what didn't. She didn't eat much, didn't sleep much, and was fueled by caffeine and willpower. She went down to the surface of Nexera to work directly with volunteers. Within hours, the main hospital in the capital city was full, so they turned a huge sports stadium into a field hospital. Thousands of beds arranged in neat groups and color-coded based on the patient's condition. Green means stable, yellow means concerning, and red means critical. As Rachel moved through the yellow section, she taught volunteers how to do things. A young Nexeran named Trix followed her around like a shadow and listened to everything she said. "Look how hard it is for him to breathe." Rachel pointed to a patient whose chest was going up and down too quickly. "That means he isn't getting enough oxygen. We need to give him extra oxygen right away before he goes into the red zone." "But the scanner says his blood oxygen is still okay," Trix said as she looked at the monitor. "The scanner is looking at averages. I'm keeping an eye on the patient. Have faith in your training and your eyes. Machines are not gods, they are tools." Rachel moved the oxygen mask around and checked the patient's pulse by hand. "There. Look how much easier it is for him to breathe now. We caught it early because we were paying attention." People in the stadium heard about Rachel's presence. People came to her with questions, problems, and small victories. She talked to everyone, cheered them on, and never let anyone see how tired she was. Even when they felt hopeless inside, leaders couldn't let themselves look like they had lost. The Velorics were also watching though, and they were changing their plan. On the 4th day, coordinated attacks started hitting shipments of supplies. Transport trucks carrying clean water and medical supplies were mysteriously delayed or sent to different places. Unexpected equipment failures at the factories that made the basic materials Rachel's teams needed. There isn't enough evidence to prove sabotage, but the pattern is too consistent to be a coincidence. "They're trying to break our supply chains," Kellick said, sounding frustrated. "Make our methods fail so that governments have to accept the Veloric's cure." When the report came in, Rachel was taking care of a very sick patient. She didn't look up from her work, and her hands were steady as she changed the 4 lines. "Then we change. What do we have that they can't take away?" Thornax rumbled in a thoughtful way. "Resources in the area. Things that are on the planets themselves." "Exactly," Rachel said. "Give all coordinators instructions. We stop depending on supplies from other countries. Use water from nearby sources and clean it by hand if you need to. Make rehydration salts out of minerals that are found nearby. Before global supply chains, we did medicine on Earth for thousands of years. We can do it again." Rachel was even amazed by how creative the volunteer networks were. They found a native plant on one world that could be turned into a useful electrolyte solution. On the other hand, engineers used industrial equipment that was never meant for medical use to make makeshift water purification systems. People on 17 planets became amazing problem solvers. But the number of deaths kept going up. The numbers were shocking. Hundreds of thousands turned into millions. Rachel's methods were saving more lives than any other, but more didn't seem like enough when she walked through wards full of dying people. Trix found her in the red zone of the Nexeran Stadium, where she was fighting to save a young mother with 2 kids. "Dr. Bennett, you need to see this. It's about the people who lived." Rachel looked at the monitor that showed the mother's vital signs, which were stable for now, and then she followed Trix to a research area they had set up in a converted locker room. There were blood samples from patients who had survived the infection on a makeshift lab table. A volunteer scientist who had multiple eyes and skin that looked like crystals pointed excitedly at the data displays. "We've been looking at the blood of survivors like you asked. Their immune systems made antibodies, which is clear, but there is more. A very consistent immune response pattern that all survivors, no matter what species they are, show. Rachel looked over the data, but her tired brain had a hard time understanding the technical details. Then it made sense. This is it. This is how they are fighting it off. Maybe we could copy this response if we could understand it. We could make our own treatment, the scientist said at the end. Not a cure like the Velorix have, but something that helps the body fight the pathogen better. Rachel's heart held hope, which was weak and dangerous. How long would it take to make something like this? Many weeks. Could be months. This isn't my area of expertise. Rachel cut in, then we find people whose job it is. She picked up a communication device and began broadcasting on secure channels. I need immunologists, biochemists, or anyone else who knows a lot about adaptive immune responses. I don't care what species, what background, what politics. We have the key to fighting this thing, we just need the right people to turn that key. The response was overwhelming. Scientists from across the galaxy, many of them disgusted by the Velorix's tactics, volunteered their expertise. Some worked openly, risking career consequences. Others contributed anonymously, feeding information through secure channels. A distributed research effort began, coordinated across dozens of laboratories and makeshift research stations. They shared data freely, built on each other's work, operated with an urgency and cooperation that academic science rarely achieved. Meanwhile, Rachel kept the volunteer networks functioning, kept patients alive, kept hope burning even as the death toll mounted. 2 weeks into the crisis, the breakthrough came. A research team on Ethon Prime, working with survivor blood samples and Rachel's observations about immune response patterns, developed a treatment. Not a cure, but an immune booster that gave patients' bodies a fighting chance. It could be manufactured from relatively common materials. Most importantly, the formula was shared freely, no patents, no proprietary controls. Mortality rates in treatment centers that implemented the new protocol dropped from 40% to 18%. Not perfect, but combined with Rachel's supportive care methods, it was working. People were surviving in numbers that made hope feel real instead of desperate. Commander Vexen watched his carefully orchestrated crisis falling apart. Governments were refusing his contracts, choosing to implement the freely available treatment instead. The Velorix cure sat unused in warehouses while a human's methods and an open-source treatment saved the galaxy. In his command center, Vexen made a decision. If he couldn't win through medicine, he'd win through force. Orders went out to Velorix military assets across the 17 worlds. Secure the human. Shut down the volunteer networks. Seize control of the treatment distribution. Kirax intercepted the orders and rushed to find Rachel. The assassin found her in the stadium, exhausted but smiling as she watched survival rates climb on the displays. Rachel, we need to leave. No. Vexen sent kill teams. They're not trying to capture you anymore. They want you dead, publicly, to break the resistance. Rachel looked around at the thousands of patients being cared for by volunteers she trained. At Trix and the other young healers who'd learned that medicine was about compassion, not technology. At the scoreboard displaying survival statistics that proved simple, human knowledge could stand against engineered death. No, she said quietly. I'm not running. Not this time. If Vexen wants to kill me in front of the galaxy, let him try. Let everyone see what the Velorix compact really values. Thornax moved to her side, his massive form radiating protective menace. Then he goes through me first. Kellic stepped up on her other side. And me? Kirax shifted into combat form, razor-sharp edges appearing along the assassin's limbs. And me? I've betrayed them already. Might as well make it count. Rachel looked at her unlikely family and felt something fierce and warm in her chest. They'd come so far. Saved so many. And if this was where it ended, at least they'd proven something important. That caring was stronger than profit. That knowledge shared freely was more powerful than knowledge hoarded. That a human with a field kit could change a galaxy. All right then, Rachel said, squaring her shoulders. Let's show them what healers look like when you push them too far. Let's show them we don't just save lives. We fight for them. Rachel never saw the Velorix kill teams. Not because Thornax stopped them, but the dragon was ready. Not because Kirax killed them, but the assassin could have. Something much stronger than any weapon stopped them. Witnesses stopped them. It didn't take long for people to hear about Vexen's orders. Every communication network in the galaxy got recordings of his orders to kill Rachel Bennett. The organization that had made the plague in the first place was looking for the person who had saved millions, shared her knowledge freely, and fought the plague with nothing but compassion and basic medical supplies. The public reaction was huge. Hundreds of world saw protests. Doctors and nurses who had been too scared to speak up suddenly did. Governments that had thought about Velerix's contracts now said no to them in public. It took days for the Velerix's carefully built political machine to fall apart. Within a week, Commander Vexen was arrested, but not by Rachel or her friends. It was his own people who did it. The Velerix compact fell apart as member groups tried to distance themselves from the plot. Some people really didn't know about Operation Necessary Correction. Some people knew but didn't say anything, and now they had to deal with their own problems. Rachel watched the news from the Nexern Stadium, where sick people were getting better and tired volunteers were working. She didn't feel happy when they told her that Vexen had been arrested. Just tired relief that it was over. "We did it," Trick said, and Rachel saw the first real smile on his face in weeks. "We really did stop them." Rachel gently corrected, "You did it. All of you. Every volunteer who kept going even when it looked like there was no hope. Every patient who battled for survival. Everyone who didn't think that making money was more important than living. I just showed you that you could." The final death toll from the pandemic was terrible. 4 million people on 17 different worlds. A number that would stay with Rachel for the rest of her life. If they had waited for the Velerix cure on the compact's terms, though, it could have been 50 million or 100 million. Every person they saved was a win against weaponized medicine and cruel acts on purpose. After that, offers came in from all over the galaxy. Rachel was wanted by governments to be their chief medical officer. Companies offered research jobs with no limit on funding. Universities wanted to give her honorary degrees and high-profile titles. Rachel said no to all of them. She told the delegations that came to her for help, "I'm not interested in positions or titles. But I want to change the way this galaxy thinks about medicine." 6 months after the pandemic ended, work started on a neutral moon that would orbit between 3 major star systems. The location was chosen because it didn't belong to any government or corporation. It was a clean slate on which something new could be made. It took a year for the Academy of First Principles to grow from bare rock. There were 100 different styles of architecture in the building, which reflected the different kinds of beings who would study there. The simplicity of humans met the elegance of Archon and the usefulness of Kethrin. There was a simple motto carved in 70 different languages above the main entrance: observe, adapt, care. Rachel stood at the door on the first day of school and watched the first class of students come in. 500 beings from all over the galaxy, from recent graduates to experienced doctors who wanted to relearn what they had forgotten. Some of them had fled from Station Crimson. Some of them were people who had lived through the pandemic. A lot of them were just people who had heard about the healer and wanted to know how she worked. Thornax landed close by, and his huge ship was turned into a permanent building that would be the Xenobiology wing. The dragon had become unexpectedly eager to teach, sharing Archon medical knowledge that was old when most civilizations were still young. "Nervous?" he asked as he sat down next to Rachel. Rachel said, terrified. "What if I can't teach this? What if the ways that worked for me don't work for other people?" "Then you'll get used to it," Thornax said, maybe with a smile. "Just like you always do. That's the whole point, right? There aren't strict rules in medicine. It's learning rules and then using them in new ways for each situation." Kellex came out of the main building with all 4 arms full of data pads and other organizational items. She had become the Academy's administrator, taking care of the logistics that Rachel didn't want to deal with. Kellex said, "First class starts in 20 minutes. Introduction to the study of medicine. Are you ready?" Rachel took a deep breath and nodded. She entered the main lecture hall, which was round and designed so that no student was more than 30 feet away from the teacher. When she walked in, the 500 students stopped talking and looked at the person who had changed medicine in the galaxy. "Welcome to the Academy of First Principles," Rachel said, and her voice rang out clearly in the room. "I'm going to start by telling you something that might surprise you. You could learn everything you learn here from a basic medical book from Earth, which is where I live. This is not new or revolutionary. It's been around for a while. Parts of it are very old." She stopped for a moment to let that sink in. The galaxy forgot these rules because technology made them seem old-fashioned. Why learn how to take a pulse when a scanner can tell you your heart rate, rhythm, and blood pressure right away? Why learn how to observe patients when AI can tell you what's wrong with a blood sample? Why learn the basics when advanced systems can do everything? Rachel took out her old medical kit, the same one she had used to save Thornax years ago. "This is what I had when I helped my first alien patient. Bandages, antiseptic, and basic tools. Nothing fancy. And it worked because I knew the basics. You stop the bleeding when the body bleeds. You clear the airway if the patient can't breathe. The system is broken. You help it until it can get better. She looked around the room at the different faces that were looking at her. Technology is great. Put it to use. But don't let it stop you from being able to think, watch, and change. Because machines break down. Protocols don't work in every situation. But a mind that is trained, a heart that is kind, and the bravery to act never go out of style. Rachel called the first lesson, the lost art of looking. She taught her students how to look at patients without scanners so they could see small signs of distress or improvement that machines might miss. Skin or scales that change color. Patterns of how you breathe. Body language that showed pain or confusion. Trix, who was now a full-time teacher at the academy, taught the basics of triage. How to quickly check on a lot of injured people and figure out who needed help first. How to make tough decisions when you don't have a lot of resources. How to keep going when it seemed like nothing would work. Dr. Vnn from Kethra taught classes on how to respond to epidemics. He had lived through the pandemic that Rachel had stopped, and his real-world experience was very helpful. Students learned not only how to deal with diseases, but also how to organize a community, improvise a supply chain, and keep people's spirits up during a crisis. Kirax taught medical ethics, which surprised a lot of people but made perfect sense to Rachel. The ex-assassin knew better than anyone how medicine could be used for evil, turned from healing to hurting. Kirax's classes on how to protect patients' rights and stand up to institutional pressure became some of the most popular at the academy. The months went by. The first class graduated and went out into the galaxy, taking Rachel's ideas with them. They taught other people, who then taught other people, and so on, until the ripples spread across hundreds of worlds. Medical schools began adding fundamental principles classes to their programs. Hospitals started teaching staff bedside observation and manual examination skills that had been forgotten for a long time. There was no revolution. It was something that lasted longer but was quieter. A change in how people thought about healing, the link between technology and care, and what medicine was really for. One night, Rachel walked around the academy grounds and watched students practice their skills in the outdoor training areas. A group was learning how to use makeshift materials to make splints. Another person was learning how to do CPR on mannequins that were made to look like different animals. She could hear Thornax talking about Archon physiological systems in the distance. Kellex found her there, which was something she often did on Rachel's quiet walks. "You're thinking about the numbers again?" Kellex said softly. "Those who didn't make it." Rachel nodded. 4 million people dead. "I keep thinking about how I could have been faster, smarter, or better prepared." "You would have saved some and lost others," Kellex said. "Rachel, you're a person. Not a god. You did more than anyone thought you could. You stood up to the strongest medical group in the galaxy with a field kit and the will to help. You won." Rachel said, "We won. All of us together." "Yes," Kellex said. "That's exactly what you taught us. One person who knows something can make a difference, but a group of people who care can change everything." They stood quietly and comfortably watching the students work. Young healers from 100 different worlds learned that the most advanced medicine needed the simplest things: observation, adaptation, and compassion. A message alert broke the moment. Rachel smiled as she looked at her data pad. It came from a medical team on a faraway planet that was dealing with an illness they didn't know about. They weren't asking her to come and save them. They were talking about what they had seen, how they had treated it, and asking for advice. They had learned the rules. Now they were using them on their own to come up with their own answers. "This is what success looks like," Rachel said as she showed Kellex the message. "Not me rushing in to fix everything. People fixing things on their own because they know they can." Years went by. The academy got bigger. There were branch campuses on other planets. Rachel's name became famous, but she told her students to call her Dr. Rachel, and remember that she was just a wilderness medic who didn't believe that advanced meant better. She never stopped being a teacher. Always learned something new. He never stopped saying that the simplest way was often the best, that machines were just tools and compassion was important, and that every patient should get care no matter how much they could pay. Rachel stood at the entrance again on the 10th anniversary of the Academy's founding, looking at the motto that was carved above the door. Watch, change, care. 3 simple rules that had changed a whole galaxy. Thornax joined her, and his scales now had silver edges that showed he was older than most Archons. He asked, "Do you have any regrets?" Rachel thought about the long trip from Antarctica to the stars. About the patients who lived and died. About the fights that were fought and won. About the simple act of kindness that started everything, like saving a dying dragon with a basic first aid kit. "Just one," she finally said. I wish I had brought more bandages with me that day I found you. The academy grounds were filled with Thornax's rumbling laugh. You brought enough, Rachel Bennett? You brought enough. Students rushed to class behind them. Ancient wisdom is being taught to future healers. The next generation would learn that medicine wasn't about the most expensive treatment or the newest technology. It was about having smart minds, caring hands, and the bravery to help someone when they needed it. People called her the Holy Healer, the one who saves worlds, the person who changed medicine in the galaxy. But Rachel knew what was going on. She was just a doctor who had remembered something important and wouldn't let the galaxy forget it again. That healing starts and ends with one person caring enough to help another, no matter what tools they have or don't have. The rest was just details. And in hospitals and field stations, crisis zones and peaceful clinics all over the galaxy, healers trained in her methods kept working. Watching, changing, caring. Every day they showed that the most advanced medicine in the universe still needed the most basic human virtues. Rachel Bennett's story was over, but the story of what she had started would go on for years to come. Because she had done more than save lives. She had taught people that they could save each other. And that knowledge would never be lost again because it was freely shared and fiercely protected.